I'll need to upload a PowerPoint. Hopefully that will cooperate.
Okay, let's see. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. And we apologize again for the little confusion. I'm happy to see you all here. And I'd like to invite our first speaker of the day. Dr. Sara Brandellero is affiliated to the Leiden University Center for the Arts in Society in the Netherlands, and her teaching and research focus on the cultures, literature, and film of the Portuguese-speaking world with a special focus on Brazil. She's the co-chair of the BA, MA, and Research MA in Latin American Studies programs, and her most recent publication is the co-edited book entitled Living Illegalities in Brazil, Practices, Narratives, and Institutions in a Country on the Edge, published by Routledge in 2020, and the co-editors are Derek Perdue and George Wink. And she currently leads the European project Nightspace, Migration, Culture, and Integration in Europe, funded by the Humanities in the European Research Area from 2019 to 2020. So Sara, thank you so much for being here with us today. You can please start your presentation.
Thank you very much, Jess. I'd like to thank everybody first for the invitation, for Will Straw for his understanding with the problems I had last time. That's very much appreciated. I'm going to talk a bit about the project that I'm leading at the moment with colleagues across Europe, looking at night spaces and the relationship with migration in 8 European cities. I'm going to just quickly upload the PowerPoint before I start. Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, right, so far so good. So the project that I'll be talking about today is a case study, part of the European project entitled Night Spaces, Migration, Culture and Integration in Europe. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about this project before I delve into the case study. And so I'd like to first of all acknowledge the support of the Hans-Wissenhaupt Institute of Advanced Studies in Germany. That is, I'm currently a fellow of theirs, although I haven't been able to travel to Germany due to the pandemic. So I'd just like to acknowledge their support. So I lead the Night Spaces, Migration, Culture and Integration in Europe, which involves 5 universities in Ireland, UK, Netherlands, Germany, Denmark and Portugal. And following our main question in the research is how are night spaces imagined, produced, experienced and narrated by migrant communities in Europe? We're looking at 8 European cities and the different spaces around which different migrant communities mobilize. And our case study in the Netherlands looks specifically at the city of Rotterdam, and with particular attention to the Cape Verdean community that is very much concentrated in the city of Rotterdam. We also look at a bit to the Amsterdam case with groups, particularly Brazilian culture producers in Amsterdam. So we follow Robert Williams' broad understanding of night spaces as being culturally mediated and socially produced. And we also think of night spaces as sites of belonging and intercultural exchange, important to the worlding of European cities. Now, we are very mindful, as I've heard also in other talks in this series and other moments of reflection on night spaces, that traditionally these have been viewed with suspicion by the authorities as sites of potential public disorder and criminality, as we know. But the hypothesis that we're working on is that they are very much important sites of memory, of crisis and regeneration connected to migrant communities. We're also working with different partners, associate partners, among whom is the former nightmare of Amsterdam, Mirik Millen, who I think you all know. So we're also looking at questions of policy and how migrant groups and cultural producers can be better supported. All of this also being absolutely topical, as we know, because of the pandemic situation that we're experiencing. So today I just want to mention that we are having a conference. We're hosting a conference in April around the theme of augmented cities. Where did the night go? And I'll give you our website at the end of this talk if you would like to register and follow some of the talks on that event between the 21st and 23rd of April. So today I'm going to be talking a bit about three young, in fact, three, not two, young Dutch Cape Verdean filmmakers, Janilda Bartolomeo, Ivan Barbosa, and Edson da Conceição, whose work I've encountered as part of the research into night spaces in Rotterdam. Now, Rotterdam is a bit of the background. It's the home to the third largest Cape Verdean diaspora in the world after Lisbon and Boston. And the night plays a very important role, I would argue, in the stories, in the cinematic stories that they create. And I would say that it provides an important narrative hinge, to use a definition by Carolyn Hinault in an article that very usefully Will Straw introduced me to. Thank you very much for supplying that reference. So in almost all of their films, there is a notable exploration of the aesthetic and the narrative potentialities of the city after dark. So through their engagement with the city after dark, the films invite us to look at the city otherwise, to use an expression used by Tim Edensor in his conceptualizations of nighttime spatial experiences. So after brief considerations on the Cape Verdean community and its relation with the city of Rotterdam, I will then focus on a selection of films by these three directors, looking at how the connections between the representations of the city after dark and urban imaginaries and constructions of memory and sense of belonging. Now, I'd like to refer to Nick Dunn's book, Dark Matters, in which he calls the night as an alternative, providing an alternative frame for thinking and being. And certainly I would say this happens in the films that I've looked at. Through an alternative frame, these films by second generation Dutch Cape Verdeans articulate politics of mobility in a city through an aesthetics of darkness that, as Robert Macfarlane, and I'm quoting Robert Macfarlane now, talks of natural dark landforms as, and I quote, existing as presences inferred, less substantial, but more powerful for it. So I would argue that all these films use the potentiality of the night as expressing forms that are suggested, that have a potential rather than being, you know, in the naked light of day, as it were. So I'll explore how the nighttime city, with its evocative and elusive play of light and darkness, dramatizes the unresolved tension between sense of displacement and belonging. Darkness is key here, for as Desserteau has noted, and I've quoted him, that is the opacity of popular culture could be said to manifest itself, a dark rock that resists all assimilation. Picking on the potentiality of opacity that Desserteau mentions here, I wish to further connect the aesthetics of darkness with the concept of politics of opacity developed by Glissant in his articulation of the poetics of relation. To quote Glissant in his reflections on the possibilities of cultural hybridity and intercultural communication and understanding, and I quote, "The right to opacity, moving beyond the notion of difference, therefore, that is not enclosure within an impenetrable autarky, but subsistence within an irreducible singularity. Opacities can coexist, can converge, weaving fabrics. So I think this idea of opacity that the night can suggest, this unknowability, I think is important in possible readings of the films that have been produced. In thinking about the relationship of migrant youth, Cape Verdean youth, in their position in contemporary Dutch society and its reflections on the history of this community. Just a few points about Rotterdam before I move into the films. Rotterdam is Europe's largest harbour. It's a city of about just over 500,000 people, and it's deeply embedded in the global history of Cape Verdean migration. The community counts around 20,000 people and is concentrated and very deeply connected to this city. So most of them live in the city of Rotterdam. And in the 1950s, it attracted migration from Cape Verde, which is an archipelago of 10 islands, nine inhabited off the west coast of Africa. And significantly, Rotterdam has been often referred to, and to this day is referred to, as Cape Verde's 10th island. So many Cape Verdeans speak of Rotterdam as the 10th island of Cape Verde. And to illustrate the psychological separation of Cape Verde within the Netherlands, people often joke that Cape Verdeans only go to Amsterdam to catch a plane to go on holiday or back home to Cape Verde. So I'm going to, the other label that's often attached to Cape Verdean group in the Netherlands is the idea of the silent migrants. So a community that is hardworking, keeps out of trouble, but at the same time often invisible, yeah, often too quiet. And all of these points, I think, emerge in the short films, the audiovisual production by Janilda Bartolomeo that I'm going to talk about now. And the other important element in her engagement with the Cape Verdean community through audiovisual is the idea of the unrecorded past. So the invisible, unwritten history of this migration, not found in archives, not really present in museums, but it is important in the building of Rotterdam. So this is something that she reflects on in the film that she produced 2018, called The Creole Lens, which is a project that she created as she was filming. She started thinking about the history of the Cape Verdean community. And so the recurring association of Rotterdam with the archipelago conjures, I think, the notion of the past, the history of migration with present day attachment with this particular place. So it conjures ideas of this experience of displacement, belonging. And this is present in the short film that you might want to check out. I didn't manage to produce lovely clips like Will does. I thought I'd stick with images in case, you know, to go on the safe side. So with this project, The Creole Lens, she created a short film called Água de Choro, Água de Mar, which translates as Water of Tears, Water of the Sea, which is basically a reflection, this journey of discovery or on the history of the community, which she was really unfamiliar with until she started filming. So it opens with a black and white shots of a rippling seashore, quite close to ground level, almost inviting us to take the position of someone entering the water. And the ship is just about visible in the horizon, which is the shot on the left there. And this visual gambit aims to historicize the narrative in this short film, connecting the history of Cape Verdean migration with the present day. Many Cape Verdeans who came to Rotterdam found work in the port and often working on ships. So The sea line shots cut to nighttime takes of unidentified city streets, which I've taken some film screenshots of there, in which the subjective camera settles on different anonymous buildings, but that are, if someone knows, very important sites to the early settlement of the Cape Verdeans in the Netherlands, such as the Pensão Delta, the Delta Hotel, which is the one with the little scaffolding at the front, where many new arrivals to the Netherlands stayed. So it was also an important center of anti-colonial activism that was very much alive in Rotterdam in the late 60s and 70s. So these scenes are followed by shots of a deserted square, which the familiar eye will recognize with the Pracinha de Quebroides. So the kind of you can translate it as the square of the broke, which is, you can see there in one of the pictures, which is very important around which many early settlers lived and where the famous Saint Juan festival in June takes place. So it's a very important festival for the community. That said, no information is given either through voiceover or subtitles. So there are no visual cues as to what we are seeing. And the darkness emphasizes the viewer's position as an anonymous night walker for whom the city remains inscrutable. The sounds of the waves washing onto the shore flow uninterrupted from the images of the opening seascape onto the urban rain-drenched nightscape that follows. So there's a connection between the natural seascape and the urban one through sound editing. Here in the city, the sound of the waves becomes enmeshed with that of the rainfall, the traffic, the passing trams, in a kind of sonic palimpsest, I would say, overlaid with the fuzzy contours of the urban nightscape. So what I would like to say is that through the darkness, this film emphasizes the smeared contours of the urban figures, of the urban buildings, and informs, in fact, the film's revisitation of migrant history. So in this way, aesthetically, the filmmaker's own cinematic vision creates a Creole lens, capturing the unknowability of the city through darkness, so that it's known, but at the same time, it can't be totally apprehended, captured. So this is a gambit into the history of Cape Verdean settlement through this short film. But I'd like to mention next the work of Ivan Barbosa, who produced a 2012 film, Cabo, which is slang word for Cape Verdean of Dutch of Cape Verdean origin or descent, being translated into English as One Night Stand. And it's centered around the experience of two Dutch Cape Verdean brothers, Arthur and Harold, and explore the theme of masculinity, and particularly the figure of the absent father, which is not uncommon among the Cape Verdean community due to the history of many immigrant men having to travel, be away for long periods of time, working on ships once they found work in the port of Rotterdam. So here are a few shots of this film. And interestingly, I would argue, although it does give a sense of the city through, for example, the title shot that you see there, and Arthur at one point visits the port in search of his father, the key scenes in this film do happen at night, particularly at home. So the film, there are two brothers. Arthur is the more ambitious of the two, studying to be a medical doctor. But his neat career plan and life plan is thrown into disarray when he discovers that Mina, a girl originally from Ghana with whom he's had a one-night stand, is pregnant. And this spurs him to search for his own father, with whom he has had little contact and who we understand still works at sea. And this, you can see the scene of the port there is when he tries to find his father to reconnect. Bell hooked has reflected on the fact that we know ourselves through the art and the act of remembering. And in Cabo, the night scenes are in fact performing a key role in providing moments of reflection for Artur about his Cape Verdean heritage and his position as a Dutch Cape Verdean, and his experience of integration in that society. So as Edna has noted in his article, Reconnected with Darkness, the night provides the potential for conviviality and intimacy to be fostered in the dark. And in fact, the domestic night scenes are where his sense of belonging to the Cape Verdean community is recovered. This is practically elided in the daytime scenes, which are mostly shot in public spaces and which we get very little sense of his Cape Verdean heritage. So the moments of reconnection, in fact, are key in allowing him to adjust his life plan to his new responsibilities as father. And so in a sense, wishing to break the cycle of the absent father and trying to move on. Now, if the focus in Cabo is very much the Cape Verdean community and is reflecting on questions of heritage, in the next filmmaker, and it's the last filmmaker that I'm going to talk about today, Edson has very much used film to think about what we call the super diversity of cities in Netherlands, and also thinking very much about the experience of Muslim youth, so not particularly focused on Cape Verdean experiences. A number of his films consider, in fact, the experience of Muslims, but again, the night is used to connect, to reflect on history of migration and how this sits with present social relations. So we could say that the darkness, and this is how I understand these films, envelops cityscapes and bodies that move through them, providing an aesthetic visualization of the temporal and spatial porosity. So time, present and past are kind of connected through darkness in these films. The first one that I'd like to mention is a short film called Last Stop, Eindhoven of 2018, which tells the story of a Dutch Moroccan youth who boards a tram armed with a suicide vest. And following the boarding of the tram under the cover of darkness, in the early moments of the short film, much of the action then takes place in a dimly lit carriage. Steamed up windows and darkened outside reduce the visibility of the outside and help concentrate our focus on the psychological drama that unfolds on board. So once on the tram, the young man is approached by an elderly Moroccan gentleman who hears him speak Arab, mutter in Arabic. Oblivious to the danger, the elderly gentleman strikes a mundane conversation with the younger man about the difficulty of getting hold of a decent second-hand car to drive to Morocco. During the brief exchange, we learned that the young Dutch Moroccan's difficulty in finding work and the mention of the discrimination against Muslims that he suffered leads to a moment of mutual understanding between generations. As the older man comments, nothing has happened. This chance encounter culminates with the older man embracing the younger Mohammed, his name is, and uttering and having a sense of the true intentions of the young man, uttering this sentence, "I understand you." This connection ultimately diffuses the situation as the younger man decides against triggering the device he is wearing. Initially, the short film plays with the traditional association of darkness and danger, such as when we see the young character dramatically fiddling with the device, which lights up against the gloom of the urban night. Yet, just as the film is about dispelling negative presuppositions, the nighttime setting is also revealed as key in enabling this to take place at all. So the mobility of these characters under the cover of darkness both dramatizes their social invisibility as well as their claim to belonging to public space. If in this first short film, Conceição engages with issues of social marginalization and radicalization among second-generation immigrant youth in an identified Dutch city, so that in Eindhoven, we don't really know where we are. It suggests Amsterdam, but it's not definite. His following film, Por Foto, of 2019, is set in the city of Rotterdam, and specifically in the area, in the neighborhood of Spanu, where Conceição actually himself grew up, which is one of the most deprived areas in the country. About 85% of the population has immigrant backgrounds, with Sudanese, Cape Verdean, Moroccan, Turkish. It's very diverse. This film is centered on the robbery of a money laundering business by 3 Rotterdam Black youth. If in Eindhoven, the extreme close-ups in chiaroscuro composition add an intensity to the psychological drama, in Por Foto opens up to a panoramic night view of the city of Rotterdam, also reflecting the wider array of characters that the film considers. And I don't have any shots of this, but I do have some shots of the last film that I'm going to talk about. So this film, Por Foto, in fact, all of Edson de Conceição films are what we could define as single night films, which Will Straw, I'm referring to you again, has written about. And it opens with an establishing shot of the city at night with a sweep of lit up windows, suggesting a glittery sense of domesticity. So it's a very impressive shot of the nights in Rotterdam. But this idea of glittery domesticity is problematized in the story that Por Foto tells us. And it also is suggested in the fragmented puzzle-like visual effect of the title shot. So it suggests the sort of idea of the broken city as well. Por Foto actually comes from this street slang of Surinamese origin, meaning rotten city. And the film only very briefly gives us a glimpse of the stunning landmarks of Rotterdam skyline when the camera fleetingly captures the iconic Erasmus Bridge with its illuminated cables rising up against the dark waters of the Nieuwmaas River. This glimpse of Rotterdam's futuristic skyline of post-war reconstruction only happens when, after the robbery, the homeless Moreno, one of the 3 youths who have carried out daring robbery, treats himself, he's homeless, but treats himself to a night in a plush high-rise hotel in the town city center. In this way, the nighttime sky view is poignantly deployed to contest the seduction of the city of the spectacle. Yeah. So this is something that the film actually contests. For the most part, in fact, the film is shot at ground level with minimal use of artificial lighting. As the director himself has commented, the night represents a kind of big canvas. He's mentioned this in an interview that I carried out with him last year, November, from which he operates to create the scene. In the case of Por Foto, the darkness that envelops the characters as they navigate the city streets after the robbery, and it also envelops them as they then have to deal with local gang warfare. The darkness seems to devour the characters as they navigate the back streets of the deprived neighborhood, illustrating their social invisibility that money cannot resolve. The film explores and suggests the multi-sensory experience of moving through darkness, with its dialectics between familiarity and a process of defamiliarization of home ground. So I think this idea of the disappearing bodies in the darkness suggests this, the fact that of the unfamiliar. So it's that kind of fluctuates between the two. To quote Edna again, as he argues, and I quote, "Dark temperature, silence, and closeness to others penetrate the body, enfolding it into the field." So he's alluding here to the multi-sensory experience of being in the dark, which many night films suggest. To move towards the end, I'm just going to mention the last of Edson de Conceição's films, a recent short called Last Ride of December 2020, which is another one single night film, and it plays with the theme of the road movie, and it's set in Rotterdam. The nighttime in this film highlights the reliance of the night economy on mostly migrant labor force. And this is brought to the fore through the main character of the migrant taxi driver, Osama, whom we see here, but who initially only tells his name as Sam. So he doesn't reveal his full name, he just goes by Sam throughout the film. Having hoped to finish his late night shift, Sam is obliged by head office to pick up one last customer. And this turns out to be an older, very frail woman called Joyce, who you see here in the other picture, and who asks the driver for a detour around the city at night with stops at different locations that are meaningful to her, that are connected to different memories of living in the city, before being dropped off at her final destination as dawn moves into daytime. In a kind of revisitation of the buddy movie format, the unlikely camaraderie that forms in Last Nuit between Joyce and Sam is forged in the seemingly dead of night, in this kind of suspended time before the ordinary business resumes. So in this moment, which would be completely insignificant, which is the taxi taking Joyce to her destination, this is where actually a meaningful encounter takes place. And the initially disgruntled and withdrawn Sam, who at the end of the encounter reveals himself to be called Osama, so is engaging with the chatty Joyce. The stops along the way, again, are locations that are far removed from the flashy locations of the Netherlands industry and business nerve center of Rotterdam, providing moments of remembrance of lived experience in the city, of the weekend dances, evening dances that she used to enjoy, favorite late night snack bar that she stops at, in which she said she could be herself out beyond the drudgery of the everyday. Through these moments of reconnecting with familiar places from the past, the driver himself rediscovers his sense of identity and belonging to the city. And this is clear as the characters bid farewell and he tells his full name, Osama, rather than the abbreviated anglicized version by which he'd gone earlier, Sam. And we find out at the end that Joyce is actually being dropped off at a nursing home because she has a terminal illness. So this is kind of the last, a goodbye trip to the city. So just before I just say a couple of concluding words, I'd just like to remember I was watching an interview with Jim Jarmusch earlier about Night on Earth. And I thought it was interesting because he was speaking about as he was making the film, he wanted to make a film about intimate relations with a stranger that often happens when you start talking to taxi drivers, and how the film is about what he says, the kind of supposedly insignificant moment of being in a taxi when you're going to your proper destination. But in fact, you have important exchanges and that memorable moments with as you go to your intended destination. So I think this is exactly what Beatrice does here, and I think the night provides the time and the space for this to happen, for this encounter to happen, and for this openness towards each other and exchange and understanding. So just to conclude, you could say that the night in these films is not just a time, but also a place. Rotterdam by Night is a place that allows these encounters to actually happen, and for that openness to exist. And I'll leave it there, and then we can have a conversation later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sara. It was great. I'd like to introduce our second speaker. Dr. Marcos Góes is an associate professor in the Department of Geography at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And the most frequent study topics include works on the geography of urban night, nighttime economy, night leisure, tourism, and social life in public spaces at night. His works also address problems related to urban mobility and violence in public space. His research has been carried out since 2010 with the city of Rio de Janeiro as a privileged site of observation. So please, Marcos, go ahead. Thanks for being here too.
Okay, I'm gonna share my PowerPoints. So, can you see it?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So, good afternoon. First, I would like to thank Jessica and the group for the invitation for me to show my research and participate in this session of the night studies. And I would like to take the opportunity to congratulate the great work that has been done by all researchers in this scientific network, the topic of urban night and varied topics. I should add that it's a pleasure to share this session with Sara. I should add that I should inform you that I perform my presentation in English, but I'm rather apologize for my limited knowledge for the language. And sometimes I need to read my attested while I'm presenting my study. So also I'm a little detached from the topic, and I only returned to it last year when the effect of the pandemic made me rethink with my colleagues of Territorial e Cidadania, Territorial and Citizenship Group at Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, some aspects that I had dealt with in previous research. So, just a minute, okay. So the purpose of this presentation is to show a review, a new look on my studies about the nightlife in public spaces of the city of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And I would like to inform you in advance that I will not be able to explore intensively into any topic, but I try to present an overview of the night in Rio for you. So I would like to speak particularly about the significance of public spaces for nighttime sociability, as I believe that in democratic societies, they are fundamental places for the expression of diversity and social plurality. It's a really important topic for me. So to try to reach my goals, I decided to address three major topics and the discussion about the current current moment, the pandemic moment. So first I'll deal with the uses of public spaces and the sociability that occurs in these places at night. In a second step, I'll show you the problem of nocturnal mobility that affects the spatial strategies of the inhabitants and visitors of the city. And finally, I present some problems related to urban violence and how it affects social life at night. And I hope you can follow me. I wish to finish the presentation with a reflection on the pandemic and nightlife in the city of Rio, where I comment on the need to overcome some mythologies in favor of a reflection on urban rhythms and a new place for the night in the debate of ordering and the meaning of social life in the city at night. So first, I would like to start with some photos that have been taken from the nightlife in the city of Rio de Janeiro. They were captured in more than now 10 years, one decade of research on the streets of the city, and it can show to us aspects of the nocturnal sociability. And there are people on the streets, sidewalks, crowds of people standing with drinks or in tables, talking, consuming. It's important to indicate here the relevance of open spaces for nightlife in the city. This aspect will be very central in this presentation, and I suggest that you pay attention to such images so they can be compared with the photographs that I'll bring it at the end of the presentation. Okay. So I may start by saying that public spaces are places for the practice of democracy, social diversity, and the co-presence of individuals are constituent part of this type of space. They are an object of social interest, and the presence in such spaces of an audience is the central aspect of the activation. So night events also activate spaces, transform them into public spaces. Some areas that are only activated during the night, in many cases for leisure activities or social gatherings, as you can see in this photo. And in the city of Rio, such activities occur mainly in the night centers. We have quite a few. These are generally open spaces such as streets, squares, sidewalks, sometimes next to commercial venues. And such places, spaces of sociability highly valued by the inhabitants of the city. And in this respect, the type of nightlife that occurs in the city has its characteristics, that's a hard word, the character in relation to other cities where generally the nightlife is found in closed or private spaces such as nightclubs, restaurants, or concert halls. So the streets are a valuable place to expression of nightlife. So some colleagues, researchers in the field of human geography, such as Paulo César Gomes, my colleague in Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, have been studying sociability in public spaces for a few decades, and they noted the relevance that the prospect of social sciences like Zimmel and Goffman had on the understanding of social interaction and how their work can bring elements to think about geography and social life. There are different proposals, but these are different proposals, but they have helped us to think about public sociability in a particular context, that of the city of Rio. So if you apply this reasoning to nocturnal sociability, we find that another explanatory key, the taste of risk, for opportunity, for the avant-garde, which Murray Melvin, that you know pretty well, associates with the idea of frontier, compared the dislocation in the territory with the movement with the day cycle. This taste for nightlife and for the public space is not restricted to the nocturnal. Well, the taste for public space is not restricted to the nocturnal, but it's is as if the nocturnal fed with its varied menu of possibilities and imagined dangers. This has to do, again, with the mythologies of the night, as an imaginary that involves dangers and fantasies, the possibility of transgressing, of leaving the main social role, of being less serious, dressed in a new outfit, under the new social masks. This informality and flexibility in social interactions emerged in several interviews that I conducted 6 years ago, for example. So unfortunately, places that allow such a level of informality are few and are concentrated in the city, in general, in the historic center and on the coastal area of Rio de Janeiro. So this situation leads many people to travel for hours until they reach the night centers. And there are few studies on the problems surrounding nightlife in the city right now in Rio. Therefore, we know little about the night in the city. This lack of knowledge has created barriers for us to understand some problems in the city at night. And one of these problems involves urban mobility at night. And although public policies have acted in decentralizing of night services and commercial areas, leisure activities remain around downtown Rio and seaside neighborhood, as you can see in this map and in this orange line. And in a study carried out in the years of 2013 and 2014, and noted that there is a concentration of night activities in these two areas of the city. This is explained by many factors, such as the consolidation of leisure and entertainment in these areas, its tourist character, the history of public investment, and so on. I cannot say more about this right now, but the key night activities, such as nightclubs, bars and restaurants, and concert halls are located in these areas, for example, as you can see here in the map. As Henri Lefebvre suggests in his 1992 book, Elements de Rythme-Analyse, I don't know how to say this in French, but social activities have different rhythms and intensities over the course of a day. More than that, each place in the city is regulated by a routine of or choreography spontaneously created daily. This rhythm of urban space is made up of paths and meeting places. These are elements that stimulate or repress flows, speeding up, slowing down the pace, and something that have been studied in detail by Thorsten Hagenström decades ago in a different manner, but in a sense. And in general, these rhythms also obey the social organization in relation to the time of operation of the urban economy. They can be cyclical, structural, but always related to the social dynamics of that moment. Sorry. And places are activated according to the demands of an audience and based on the interests of those who created these activities. So when looking at the graph of daily trips in the metropolitan area around the municipality of Rio, we can see that between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., the flow of people is drastically reduced about 80%, 8% less than during business hours. These red areas you can see in the graph. There is a relative dependence on public transport, even though the main system, metro trains and suburban rails do not operate between 11 p.m. and 5 p.m. And so this process of advancing nighttime activities and expanding nighttime flows also unfolds in different forms of sociability that occurs on the way or at the stations and transportation terminals. And public transportation itself becomes a space for social interaction during the night, from the meeting between workers who return to their homes and people who are going to a night out, for example. And I only want to show you 3 examples of this kind of nightlife strategies. So first one, the creation of waiting strategies after the working day, when people stop at bars and restaurants before returning home to avoid traffic jams, or after a night away from home, waiting until the return of the functioning of public transport systems. As I said, they usually operate, they do not operate between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. So people have to wait until 5 a.m. to return to their homes. So the power will be extended. 2, the creation of mobile circuits across the city at night, usually in private vehicles that articulate points such as nightclubs, bars, fast food stalls, and even gas stations and the like. So this is a very creative alternative to nightlife. And 3, the organization of local nightlife alternatives, it's the creation of groups and local entertainment initiatives, especially for young people, such as creation of rap, funk, samba shows, cultural performances, fairs, parties in public spaces, or even in rented vehicles like these bus parties that I can say that's mobile nightclubs in some sense. The third topic, and it's the fear and violence at night. And these examples that I just show you help us to see how creative and diverse these strategies are. This desire for the night, as I already said at the beginning, finds, however, barriers, obstacles that mark the daily life of the city. We have a repressed potential due to an old social problem, a really important problem for me, that is violence, and it's still a factor that largely restricts the mobilization of efforts around public policies to reorganize the pace of urban life in the city. So the relationship between violence and nightlife is the subject of major controversies in the social science. In general, urban violence is a topic widely studied in Brazil, and particularly in Rio de Janeiro. Some studies have already established the relationship between violence and the narrowing of urbanity, civility, citizenship. All these three elements are organized around democratic principles, and democracy needs space to exist. That's a correlation. And the presence of violent action also tends to reduce life in public spaces. This also has an impact on the possibilities for social interaction at night. So silent night, empty streets, empty nights, silent streets. It's a real sensible topic. And in the city of Rio, we experienced how democracy has been weakened by the constant presence of violence. In surveys carried out in newspaper for the past 30 years, we see a persistent correlation between periods of increasing violent conflict and attitudes of self-exclusion, self-segregation, and escapism. Many areas of the city were faced with curfews, and long before the pandemic, as I can say that. In such areas, circulation during the night represents a risk of death, robbery, aggression, sanctions by organized crime, factions, or even by the hands of the state itself. So the official violence itself was directed at this unwanted body, immoral behavior, and many kinds of practices considered inadequate or illegal. And the question that always comes back to my mind when I research the nightlife is how to live these nights in the midst of fear. So this is a serious problem of our society, and the withdrawal of public, the withdrawal of public spaces, the seclusion of the home environment, the freezing of social life, as I can see. For the municipality of Rio, you can see now the data for the year 2019 is clear. At night and dawn, about 45 of violent lethality occur, although the circulation of people represents only 15 to 20% of the total during the day. And about 80% of deaths occur through firearms. So it's really brutal. And the vast majority in the north zone of the municipality. And if you compare this map with the other one, you can see that this murder take place far from the night centers, but close to those deprived areas of the municipality. And here, I'm only commenting on the problem of murders. I'm not showing data about assaults, thefts, violence against women, or etc. So in this sense, it's safe to say, for now, that if night is seen as a moment that allows social gatherings, the fulfillment of desires, fun, parties, it also appears as a moment of fear, anxiety, worry, and many authors have already talked about it. So this ambiguity is presenting the imaginary about the city, dangers and pleasures coexist in the same symbolic environment. Such images are used in public policies, in urban projects, even in the making of law. And however, that discussion is rarely created around this imaginary. And I believe that we still need some kind of a cognitive change that thinks about what happens in the city during the night. And I think it should be part of public policy in Rio. So, and I would like to finish talking about the pandemic and the nightlife during the pandemic in Rio by saying that it's not casual that such imagery serves to think about nightlife during the pandemic. If we do not understand what social practices are, where and how they occur, how people circulate at that time, and what dangers they are into, it's difficult to plan and elaborate strategies to contain agglomerations. So I do not need to say to you all, we are currently experiencing a very gloomy moment in Brazil and in Rio particularly. And the pandemic has hit our daily lives very severely. And the disease itself and the public measurements to restrict activities have impacted the lives, work, and the leisure of the inhabitants since March and 2020. Even the banal act of leaving the house at night has become a risk act. So it's adding new problems to the nightlife. So the spread of the virus became a public problem of great repercussion. And in my group, a research group, we are studying this phenomenon right now. So these measures of social isolation, that is the reduction of activities that could generate potential crowds of people in closed and open space, are agendas of intense social debates. Initially, these measures were very restrictive, affecting commercial areas and services. So only activities considered essential to contain the effects of the pandemic were allowed, such as hospitals and supply services, etc. Over time, the isolation measures were relaxed, and the opening of the economy almost made us to return to the practices prior to the pandemic, which in part we see the result now. So it's kind of confusing and frustrating for us, all those mixed messages and public conflicts, but I don't want to talk about this right now. I can talk about if you have some questions about it. But the night economy was severely impacted by the measures as far as restaurants, cinemas, theaters were closed promptly or had reduced the opening hours. If you compare to the photographs I brought to you at the beginning of the presentation, you can see now how empty these streets at night are in this moment we are talking. Many companies closed during this period. There was a drop in profits in most of the sector and a restructuring around the special events and deliveries. So many images were broadcast by the press and local government to build a narrative of contrast between work and leisure, between day and night, between party and sorrow. Some images and texts evoked ancient and mythologies about nights and parties as places of transgression of order, moral degradation, incivility of its regular, and the like. And other images, great considerations given to the problem, and the occurrence are relativized based on the problem infringed on the economy and the sustainability of business, and some of them traditionally associated with the nightlife in Rio. So it's a very controversial topic here right now, and currently has a large public audience, and I should add that. And I want to ponder a few things. What I want to ponder is that in the midst of so many measures and so many speeches, there's an endorsement of the idea of transgression associated with the night, and a profound lack of knowledge about the behaviors that develop in the night centers. Even more, little is known about the rhythms of the city, about the circuits and strategies of urban night mobility. So the pictures, you can see pictures of buses and subways crowded in the middle of the pandemic, which is shocking. And they, of course, a portrait of this reality we live in, deeply marked by our radical social and spatial inequality, but also with a misunderstanding of nightlife is in Rio in some aspects. The next slide is not followed by what I'm saying, but I just want to finally finish my presentation saying that I may say that the city needs to be seen as a whole, spatial, temporal, and in its diverse peculiarities. We have to be sensible to understand its rhythms, the fluctuations that occur over the course of a day, a week, a season. We need to see its problems such as violence, mobility, social inequality in perspective as a problem in time and space. For that, it's necessary to grow the field of debates about night in the cities, especially now in Rio, in Brazil. And most importantly, we must value public spaces, social environments for interaction, places that allow democratic coexistence, even if you want to party. For this, we must provide better conditions for movement and presence of people in the city, and be it during the day, be it at night. So I would like to thank you so much for the invitation, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcos. That was great as well. And I think I speak for everybody saying that these were amazing presentations, Sara and Marcos, and we could learn a lot about different territories and Portuguese-speaking communities. And a quick note about questions. I have a few questions, but I would like to give you, you all the opportunity to ask questions, and you can do it in English, em espanhol, francês, and in português hoje também. And we will do our best to translate and make sure that everybody can participate. And you can either use the chat or ask your questions directly to us. So do we have any questions to start with? Just let me know. Soledad, do you have questions? Okay, go ahead. We can't hear you, Soledad. No escuchamos. Okay. Okay, Soledad has a question for Marcos about the charts. In the slide, Nightlife and City Rhythm. I don't know, Marcos, if you want to go back to sharing the slide. Cultura y Arte. Yeah, let's make this work. So the Nightlife and City Rhythm. Yes.
Yeah.
So.
It's just,
yeah, that's a great because how did you make this and how did you collect all this information to create these charts?
Okay, I would like to speak, I will try to speak in English, but if you cannot follow, maybe I use Portuguese.
Okay, we can help.
Yes, thank you. Soledad is a great question, but it's a long explanation to maybe I try to be very short in my my response to you. First of all, it's inspired by a book that's called Paris la Nuit. There is an exposition, how can I say this? and they have a book with this kind of chronotopias, and that they served as inspiration for me. So I have to deal with a mass of data about all these different activities, and I researched this in a database in Rio. So and then I have to do some field trips to how can I say this? Put in a timetable all these specific activities and then group them because they are part of this this map. To make this map, I have to organize it in different how can I say pesos? Jessica, help me.
Mas o que você quer dizer por peso?
Pesos diferentes entre quando você vai escolher as variáveis.
Variables.
Yeah.
Variables. Okay. Thank you. So I have to define different variables, and I use this to organize which kind of activities are truly concentrated at night, and which activities you can see at night, but they are not exclusively nocturnal. So this make me define the variables and how they are representative of nightlife activities. So, and I made this by incorporating all my field trips to the nightlife in Rio, and it was a 5 years research to do this. So I don't know if I explained it correctly to you, but you can ask me more about it.
Okay. Thanks, Marcos. Thanks, Soledad, for your question. Do we have more questions from the audience? Anybody? No?
Maybe okay. A quick question for Sara.
Go ahead.
Could you just repeat a little bit what you said at the beginning, that the relation between dark and light as a dramatization of the relation between belonging and something? I thought it was very inspiring, but I couldn't write it down. So I don't know. If you can elaborate a little bit on that, that would be amazing.
Okay, so I think it works on different levels. I think the films play on the relationship between dark and lightness on bodies and buildings, pathways in the city. It fuzzies boundaries between, so the contours of things are fuzzy, are smeared, and I think it speaks to the reflection that some of the films speak of the unknowability, of impossibility of defining. So that's why I brought in glissant, you know, the opacity, the idea of opacity. And that particularly, I think, is what Janilda refers to, and that's why I think she was drawn to the night to express the relationship with the city in these terms. The other aspect of the nighttime aesthetic that I think works in these films is the idea of the space being familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. So to belong, but at the same time to feel displaced. And that works also with this play of darkness, when the bodies kind of disappear into the night. And it's as though the night sort of gobbles them up, as though they belong, but at the same time they're not really entirely in control of the space in which they move. So I think the night is very much used to evoke all these experiences of belonging, but also problematizing the relationship with the space in this way.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Mika. Thanks, Sara. Okay, Yolanda, your question. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I would like to ask, Marcus something. I think these kinds of waiting are fascinating. And if you could explore further, for example, at the gas stations, is there music? Is there drinking? Is that allowed? And about the waiting in a bar for traffic to calm down, is that an everyday practice? I don't know if you could talk to us a little bit more about these kinds of waiting. I think that's really, really interesting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yolanda. Gas stations. It's a practice that it's allowed because they have kind of little stores that sell drinks, so people can have a beer. Sometimes they use the sound of their car. They're not simple sounds. They are big, huge sound systems in the back of the car. So someone opens up the back, I don't know how to say this, the back of the car. So they can be very loud and people drinking, talking, and it depends. It's very by time and place, and sometimes the policy comes and say, oh, you're not allowed to do this because it's too loud, because that is it's a neighborhood, familiar neighborhood or a residential area here, so you should stop. But usually people use this as a time before the nightlife, the real nightlife in nightclubs and etc., because the drinks are cheaper than in the club. So it's a strategy to leave the nightlife as it's full. Let's say that. And the experience of waiting, and it's really amazing. I have two colleagues in the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro that works in the territories of waiting. I don't know how, waiting territories, something like that. And it's really cool because we have this kind of waiting in Rio because we have traffic jams. It's a big city, so it's 7 million people living here, and 12 million people or more in the metropolitan area. So sometimes to avoid the traffic jams, people wait, even in a Monday or maybe Wednesday, they wait to go back to the place, to their homes. So they spend 2 or 3 hours drinking, waiting to the traffic jam and goes away, and then he return home. And you have another strategy when you go to Friday or Saturdays to these nightlife centers. Sometimes people have to wait until the next morning, because there is no public transportation to these suburban areas, poor areas in Rio. So it's really fascinating how people arrange time to be in the city and at night in the city. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yolanda and Marcos. Do we have other questions from the audience? Will, do you want to mention anything about your comment in the chat? No? Okay. Well, I have 2 quick questions for both, one for Sara and the other one for Marcos. Also, the gas station parties were one of the few options we had growing up in the countryside in Brazil. So like, it was a big thing. And also it's public drinking is allowed in many places in Brazil. On the contrary, here is not allowed, but it's widely adopted in many cities in Brazil. So this makes like gas station parties and sidewalk parties possible. Sara, I recently we're discussing here, and my questions I'm asking in comparison with some things going on here in Montreal. We had all these focus groups and we were talking with different communities in the city about how they perceive and experience nightlife here. And some questions of belonging among migrant communities came up a lot. Like the night is a safe space of belonging and healing, and where they can be together. And if you also put together some racial tensions here in the city for these migrant communities specifically. So they completely cannot go to specific places, but they saw nightlife and some parties and some space of belonging to. I don't know if this is something that came up in your research specifically or in the movies, if you could comment this a little bit. And for Marcos, also because you present lots of data, and I know how difficult it is to have access to information in Rio, and how uncooperative sometimes the city government is, and how difficult it is to get this info that is kind of like scattered across different databases, different departments. So if you could talk a little bit about your process, like to collect data. It's following up a little bit on Yolanda's question. If you gather this information yourself, or if you use any databases, and how difficult or how easy this was. So I appreciate, thank you again, both of you.
Do you want me to go first? Marcos? Oh, okay. All right.
Thanks, Sara.
Definitely, that's one of the that kind of wanted to. That's one of the focus themes of our research, and certainly, night spaces are hugely important to create opportunities for intercultural understanding, bringing different communities together. And that's why also the pandemic has been so devastating in that respect. The kind of moments of encounter that don't necessarily happen naturally in the workplace for many people. So that's one area of concern. And of course, in the pandemic, as in many other places, smaller independent venues that have been set up and created by different migrant communities have often been the ones that have suffered the most. And we don't know what the future lies beyond this. So definitely, and culture being hugely important, music being often produced and performed at night is creating opportunities for coming together, understanding, expressing, sense of belonging. Yeah, so yeah, definitely.
Thanks, Sara. Marcos, if you want to answer.
Thank you, Jessica. It's different databases that I used. I have collected many of this data from field trips and field work, and so as I can say, I interviewed people. I interviewed business entrepreneurs and nightlife people who involved in nightlife in Rio. And there is several people working now, especially in this Lapa neighborhood that is next to the Central Business District. And also I collected some of this data that I showed to you. We have now, you can access the public security information in a vast database, very specifically available, and company registration in the I don't know how to say this in English, but Secretaria de Fazenda, where there is a secretary where people organize and register companies in Rio de Janeiro. So you have all these companies, and you have to find out where they are, and then I had to locate this in a map and think about it and visit these places. So I have a few different databases I can share to you if you want to, because I done this a long time ago. For now, we don't have information about night mobility, because the data is old now. It's 2015. I think this is the last time we have this data, but most of them you can just we have now this information and database available for us, so I can share with you if all people if want to.
Thanks, Marcos. I think Mika has a question. Go ahead, please.
Yes, it's for Marcos again. I think I'm interested in this question of violence, and maybe I'm not sure I understood everything, or what I understood is that violence, of course, decreases night activity, especially I would say the bohemian kind of night activity, being in the street, drinking in the street and stuff like that. And I think it's mostly what you said. I don't know if there is, if you could elaborate on that, maybe what's the relation between this increase of violence and maybe the way the businesses, I mean bars and clubs, control the access and or implement security measures. I don't know if you work on this, and if you talk a little bit more about this relation between violence and nighttime in maybe private places.
Thank you, Michael. And it's not Michael, it's Michaël.
Yes.
Yes, it's French. So thank you for a question, because I'm not, I really not studied the private bars and restaurants and nightclubs, etc. I used to work on public spaces, but you can see a correlation between this increase of violence and sometimes the increase of security measures, and also sometimes the closing of these specific venues. So we have this problem. One area that I can say, that's the Lapa neighborhood. We have this. If you can show a graph, you have a point where this increasing of violence affected directly the frequency of people in these not only in public spaces, but in some kind of nightclubs and concert halls. There's no big concert halls, small concert halls in this area, because the problem is not only the violence affect directly the nightclub, for example, but it's the assets, it's the mobility of the people from the area they live to these places. So when they come back in the door in the middle of the night, they can suffer risks of being murdered, for example. So that's a really big issue, and sometimes people prefer to use personal vehicles or taxis and Uber or other kind of vehicle than the public transportation, because they think the public transportation is not good, they are dangerous, and etc. So the problem is not only affecting the place where the nightlife occurs, but also the place where the people live. So in general, the increase of violence, and it's not easy to say, but I'm really simplifying this here, but usually the presence of people in the nightlife decays a little. I don't know if I answered your question.
So, I mean, the decrease in public space activity doesn't transfer in private activity, or I mean, in private clubs or maybe private parties in apartments, but maybe it's more like people don't go out anymore. They just give up, or they, how do you see that?
They avoid to go to nightlife, but not all the people. Not just
of course not.
But you can see there's a decay in public life, but also in the nightlife in general when you see the data. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We might have time for one last quick question or comment if you have. Anybody? Okay,
Can I ask quickly something to Marcos?
sure, of course.
I'm just curious whether you've considered religious meetings at night and the activity that goes around that kind of movement.
Sorry, Sarah, it's about religion meetings at night.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that is something that I not and didn't study this topic in general. I just mapped it and put on a map and located this kind of night events on the about religions and temples. So, but I never studied. So I'm afraid I cannot say much more about that. But it's interesting because one of the activities that in the pandemic times here in Brazil evaluated as crucial, relevant, it's the church. So you have to maintain they opened during the pandemic, not in the beginning, but after 3 or 4 months, we decided that it's a crucial service, so you have to stay open. Now it's one of this week is one of the few activities open at night. So yeah, I'm sorry. But
Yeah,
I'm
also thinking of sort of violence against Afro-Brazilian religious practices.
Okay.
You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because I know quite a lot's gone on.
Yeah, it's another topic about because it's a very recurrent practice you can see here, and mostly occurring, and I don't know if it has a relation to nighttime at all, but I know that is a really big issue here with the discussion conflict between different religions. Maybe something that we should address a little more attention in the future, for sure.
Okay, thanks so much for the references here, for the great questions, and especially to Marcos and Sara. Thank you so much for accepting this invitation. It's great to learn from you, and I'm sure we could keep discussing this for hours and hours. Thanks. I don't know, Michaël, if we have any other announcements, because we have new people today, our listserv, if we can share some resources over here so people could join us.
Of course. So if you want to be on the list of the seminar, which is also the list of the night researcher, the international night researcher group, you can just go on the blog. I'll give you the link right now, and subscribe to basically to the mailing list. And it's here. Wait a minute.
We have these encounters once a month, and we'll have in April, May, and June, and then next semester as well. So it's always like different topics, different people, and it's been like a great way to meet during the pandemic and know amazing people, great researchers. So if you could join us, would be very happy. And there's Sara resources as well. And whatever you can, like if you want to share your research networks, conference projects with us, that's great. We can like use the list for this. And like, we're very happy to be part of this community. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.